Lucie Chadorn-Fasson is the director of Vigicruise, France's national flood monitoring service, and when the Loire dropped slightly after the weekend crest, she did not offer relief. Instead, she called the belief that the waters were receding exactly what it was, an illusion. The rain continues recharging the tributaries, and the main rivers are not dropping. Saturday, February 14th, 2026, approximately 6 p.m. local time. Families in Les Ponts-de-Cé and Saint-Jean-de-la-Croix, small communes just south of Angers, sitting directly on the Loire, receive an FR alert notification on their phones. The Préfecture de Maine-et-Loire has ordered a preventive evacuation, and roughly 850 to 900 people are told to leave their homes for the night. The reason is not that the water has arrived. It is that the levee separating their streets from the Loire may not survive the night, and the authorities are not willing to wait and find out. By the time the crisis peaks 4 days later, nearly 2,000 people will be evacuated across western France. 4 departments will be on red flood alert with 13 more on orange. A 53-year-old man will be swept into the Loire and presumed dead, and 20,000 households will have lost power. France has been raining for 35 consecutive days. Since mid-January, successive Atlantic storm systems have crossed the country one after another. A conveyor belt of low-pressure systems pulling moisture off the ocean and dumping it on catchments that stopped absorbing water weeks ago. The soil moisture index has reached its highest level recorded since 1959, which means the ground across western France is effectively waterproof. Every drop that falls runs straight into the nearest river at full speed. For residents along the Loire, the Maine, and the smaller tributaries feeding them, this has meant weeks of watching water rise, recede slightly, then rise again, each cycle a little higher than the last, each so-called recovery a little shorter than the one before. The pattern creates a specific kind of exhaustion, because you cannot relax when the water never fully leaves. You sandbag, you pump, you watch the river gauge, and then another Atlantic low arrives and the numbers start climbing again. By mid-February, the small rivers are the first to respond, swelling fast and overflowing into fields and low-lying roads. Then comes what hydrologists call propagation. The small rivers feed into the Maine feeds into the Loire, and each crest arrives hours after the last. Because the ground cannot absorb anything, the peaks stack on top of each other instead of receding between events. Not one river in crisis, but an entire basin system responding at once. The result is that by February 14th, the system is loaded to capacity, and one more push will tip the balance from high water into evacuate now. Return to Saturday evening. The FR alert goes out, and roughly 850 to 900 residents in Les Ponts-de-Cé and Saint-Jean-de-la-Croix are told to leave. This is a preventive evacuation. The water is not breached and the levees have not failed, but the Préfecture has determined that the risk to the Loire dike sector is high enough that waiting is no longer acceptable. That distinction matters because it changes the texture of everything that follows. In an emergency evacuation, you run, you grab what is closest, and you go. However, in a preventive one, you pack. You have time to choose what matters, to load bags into the car, wrestle the dog into the back seat, and call your mother to say you're leaving. But the whole time, you are walking through your own house knowing that an engineer somewhere has looked at the numbers on the levee and decided your home is no longer safe enough to sleep in. That is not panic, that is dread. Evacuees are directed to sports halls and temporary shelters set up by the commune, and families arrive with overnight bags, children half asleep, and pets confused by the disruption. Some will return the next day, while others will not return for days. As the crisis broadens over the following week, the total climbs toward 2,000 across multiple communes and basins, because the propagation effect means the danger moves geographically, with upstream areas flooding first and crests traveling downstream, triggering new evacuations hours later in communities that thought they had more time. In France, a country with engineered defenses, real-time monitoring, and a national alert system, evacuating 2,000 people because engineers do not trust the levees is a signal the system is running at its limit. In Les Ponts de Sey, south of Angers, residents built makeshift wooden walkways to navigate streets flooded by the Loire. Planks laid across chairs and whatever furniture was available, creating improvised bridges between doorways because the ground floor is underwater and there is no other way to move between buildings. In nearby Denay, residents stopped trying to walk entirely and instead moved through their own streets by boat. These are not remote villages in a developing country. These are communes within the metropolitan area of Angers, a city of 400,000 people in the heart of the Loire Valley. Families are boating through their neighborhoods because the river has moved into town and settled in. Nationally, the power grid takes the hit that accompanies every extended flood event. By Tuesday afternoon, Anetis reports approximately 20,000 households still without electricity. And still is the operative word, because this is not a sudden outage from a single storm, but a progressive loss of service as floodwater reaches substations and distribution lines across multiple departments over multiple days. Transport disruption is widespread, as local road access degrades with floodwater spreading from smaller rivers into the major ones. Rail and regional travel are disrupted alongside it. The picture is not one dramatic infrastructure collapse, but rather a slow, distributed breakdown across a region. Roads impassable here, power out there, access cut somewhere else, each piece adding to a cumulative isolation that makes the whole area harder to live in, harder to move through, and harder to supply. Tuesday evening, February 17th, into the early hours of Wednesday the 18th. A 53-year-old man falls from a small boat or kayak on the Loire at Chalon-sur-Loire, south of Angers, and the river takes him immediately. The Loire in mid-February 2026 is not the postcard version, not the gentle wide river that tourists photograph from chateau balconies in summer. It is swollen by 35 consecutive days of rain, fed by every tributary in western France, and running at a volume and speed that has placed 4 departments on the highest flood alert in the country. When a person enters that water, the river does not negotiate. François Penaud, the senior local official coordinating the response, is asked about the chances of finding the man alive. His answer is not diplomatic. Given the flow and speed of the Loire, he says, there is objectively little chance. Think about the weight of that statement for a moment. A government official on the record, telling the public and this man's family that the river is too fast and too powerful for a human body to survive in. Not hedging, not offering careful optimism, stating a physical fact about what the Loire does to a person under these conditions. We do not know the man's name, and we do not know why he was on the water that night. What we know is that the Loire, gorged by 5 weeks of rain carrying the runoff of an entire region that cannot absorb another drop, took a person and has not given him back. Now return to Chadorn-Fasson's warning from the beginning, because she was not making a prediction, she was issuing a correction. When the Loire dropped slightly after the weekend crest, the natural instinct across western France was relief. The water peaked, it will recede, and we can start cleaning up. However, Chadorn-Fasson looked at the data and called that belief exactly what it was, an illusion. The rain has not stopped, and it continues falling onto catchments that have been saturated for over a month. Ground that has not been able to absorb water since late January, when the soil moisture index hit its highest level since 1959. Every new rainfall event immediately recharges the tributaries that feed the Main, and the Main feeds the Loire, and within hours, the rivers are climbing again before they have finished dropping from the last pulse. The system never fully resets. By Wednesday, February 18th, where 4 departments are on red alert and 13 more on orange, with the orange zone expected to expand as additional rain and wind arrive midweek. The government's ecology minister frames it in language that should alarm anyone paying attention. This is the new normal pressure. For the nearly 2,000 families already displaced, Chadorn Fasson's warning translates into a single exhausting fact. There is no timeline for going home. And for every family still in their house along the Loire, the Maine, or any of the dozens of tributaries feeding them, it means the FR alert on their phone could sound again tonight. The surface explanation is straightforward. From a persistent Atlantic storm train, successive low-pressure systems pulling moisture off the ocean in what meteorologists describe as an atmospheric river pattern, has been crossing France since mid-January. 35 consecutive days of rain onto ground that stopped absorbing water weeks ago, with every drop running straight into rivers that are already full from the last system. However, what the monitoring data reveals about how the Loire levee system is actually performing under this sustained load, and what engineers have quietly acknowledged about the gap between the design capacity of those defenses and what this winter is delivering, changes everything about how we understand the risk facing the 400,000 people living in the Angers flood zone. That is next. As of Wednesday, February 18th, nearly 2,000 people remain displaced across western France. A 53-year-old man is missing in the Loire and presumed dead. 4 departments are on the highest flood alert in the country, with 13 more on orange, and the orange zone is expected to grow. 20,000 households remain without power. The rain has not stopped, and the Atlantic systems are still arriving. The next round of wind and precipitation is forecast for midweek, aimed directly at catchments that have been saturated for over a month. Every river in western France is waiting for the next pulse, and the levees that held on Saturday night in Le Pont de Sey will be tested again. Vigicru's director called the receding water an illusion, and the data says she is right. The rivers are not draining, they are reloading. France is not recovering from a flood. France is still inside one.